This Mario is representative of the Mario Party series back in like 2014, 2015 when they released this line of figures. This is also Mario. This Mario figure is representative of the 30th anniversary series in which they decided to go back to their roots. This is the Super Mario Brothers figure. And finally, this is Mario. This Mario is representative of the 3D Mario series. He is from Mario Odyssey, the best-selling 3D Mario game of all time. Mario Odyssey was a global phenomenon, and I'm telling you, everyone and their mother was talking about this game before its release, during the hype cycle, and after its release. For years to come, people will still to this day say that Mario Odyssey is one of their favorite Mario games of all time. And of course, the hype got me to buy this cappy hat, this really fun eyeball mechanic from Mario Odyssey in which you could throw a cap at an enemy and boom, you would capture them and become that enemy to use their abilities to progress in a level, or just simply to use their abilities for whatever you wanted. You cannot tell the story of the Nintendo Switch, the greatest success of Nintendo's history, the highest selling console of all time in Nintendo's history. Mario Odyssey is the game that you just cannot tell the story of the Switch without. Super Mario Odyssey was nothing but fun from start to finish. Although it had some flaws, people didn't like everything about it. The moon system, being able to get so many different collectibles just by simply ground pounding on the ground or sitting on a bench, you just get a new collectible. That was something that a lot of people criticized, but still to this day, 30 million sales is what Super Mario Odyssey sits at, and it is undeniably a great game with fantastic sales. And as I was talking in a previous video about the Nintendo Switch 2 and its sales numbers and it being the next Wii and those couple videos that I had made in tandem, I received a comment, a very interesting comment, saying that 3D Mario wasn't in fact a system seller. It's only as of late, it's only with Mario Odyssey that we have been able to see those 3D Mario sales absolutely shatter the 2D Mario sales. The comment was essentially saying that Mario is not a system seller, that 3D Mario is not the type of game that will get people to go to the stores and buy a new console. And this idea shook me to my core, to be honest, because at first my gut reaction was like, no, of course, that's just wrong. Like, that's just not how we're gonna rewrite history here. That's not the case. But then I did start to think about it. Then I started to think on my drive back from work, on my drive back from college, I decided I think that this person might be right. And even if they're not right, they made a really good point. And today we're going to talk about that because the Nintendo Switch 2 is the fastest selling console of all time. It is Nintendo's fastest selling console ever, and the console is going to reach new heights. The Switch 2 is a great piece of hardware in my opinion, with some really good games for the hardcore audience, but in my opinion, I think it's going to have newer, bigger, and more broad appealing games to get more people into the ecosphere, and then to get even more people on board with Nintendo and with Mario and all these different franchises overall. I think a 3D Mario game is likely to be coming this year and should be announced sometime either in June or July. I think a 3D Mario is one of those big games that Nintendo needs to put out to get people hyped, to get people invested, and it's something I'm pretty sure they're going to reveal this year. And if you've been a part of any online discourse with Nintendo and the Switch 2, you absolutely know what I'm talking about with people just ravenous for 3D Mario. Nintendo Land is an acquaintance of mine, Landon. He's a very nice guy, love the guy, and he is just really a big fan of 3D Mario, but he cannot seem to get any breaks. People always say that he is just this whiny baby, and he really isn't. If you watch his videos, he's really not. But people will clown on him because he wants 3D Mario more than anything, and he leads that crowd of people that say the Nintendo Switch 2 doesn't have any big games, and that is because they don't have anything of that standard of a 3D Mario. But today, I need to question that. Is that the standard? Is a 3D Mario game actually going to save the Switch 2 for people who think that it needs saving, for people who think it needs bigger games, including myself to some extent, although I love the console, I think it could use another big game or two. I mean, people are acting like everything is fine, but if we get to the end of this generation and there's no 3D Mario game, no 3D Zelda, no Smash, no new Animal Crossing, no new Splatoon, you're going to have problems. This is not going to be a successful console without those games. So I don't think there's anything wrong with me saying that I want those games to come eventually. I'm not wanting them right now. I don't need everything right now. It's only been like 9 months, but yes, I do want those big games to come eventually. So let's compare 3D Mario to 2D Mario because there is a fascinating trend here. Now we could start all the way back at the NES, in which I have memorized that the Super Mario Brothers game sold 40 million copies on the NES. 40 million is nothing to sneeze at, and it is 10 million more than Mario Odyssey. Now you might just want to say that 2D, boom, better already. Well, no, let's take a perspective of this context. We need to put these numbers into the context of their historical relevance and fully understand why these things happened the way they did. There was no such thing as a 3D environment back when the NES released and back when Super Mario Brothers took the world by storm. The NES, Mario Bros. And just Nintendo at large brought gaming back to the Western audience and took us out of what was a economic and financial crisis at the time for people who were just not paying all this money for all of these inflated game systems. People started to buy video games again after Nintendo. It started to become a household thing, and it started to become a very popular hobby with the NES. And of course, there was hardly any competition at the time for that type of home console thing. There was never any other console like a PlayStation or an Xbox back in those days. Then there was the SNES, in which they were able to double the amount of bits that you had on your screen at one time. They had somewhat of a 3D game with Star Fox, but that wasn't even really 3D. I mean, technically it was. I'm not going to invalidate Star Fox here, but compared to what we know as a 3D game today, you go back to that Star Fox game and it is rough. And of course, there were a lot of handheld games at the time as well that never could have had any sort of 3D capability. But let's move forward to the N64. The N64 was the first console Nintendo ever produced that was capable of 3D graphics in a large scale. And what better game to showcase the console's graphical capabilities than Super Mario 64, one of the most legendary games of all time. Super Mario 64 went on to sell 11 million copies on that console alone, and honestly, that's a really good number for the amount of people that ended up having N64s, and of course, to this day, it is culturally still relevant. It is one of those games that everyone recognizes, hey, might have some jank, the camera might not be that great, but it is still one of the best games ever made in terms of pushing the medium forward, in terms of innovation. But we can't really use this game either because there was no 2D game on an N64, just like there were no 3D games on any consoles prior. So it's really hard to compare the two on the same consoles and use any sort of reliable source of information here. Even next on the GameCube, I was almost shocked to find there was no real 2D Mario game on that console. All we have to go off of is Mario Sunshine, which sold a respectable 6 million copies on a console that was the worst performing home console of all time for Nintendo. The DS is technically the first console that we can technically compare a 2D game to a 3D game, and even then, I am kind of hesitant to do so because that new Super Mario Bros. DS game was a huge comeback for the series. There hadn't been a 2D Mario game in years that was of that caliber and really brought all those nostalgic fans back for more. And even then, even if I were to compare it to the 3D game on that console, which was Super Mario 64, that was still just kind of like a remake or a re-release or a port or whatever you want to call that game, because it wasn't an original DS game. It was simply a port over from the 64. New Super Mario Bros. Sold 30 million copies on the DS, the exact same as Mario Odyssey, mind you, and was equally as important for that console and in culture in general as Mario Odyssey was. And if you really want to compare those two, 64 DS ended up selling 11 million, so that's about 19 million short from the 2D game. So if we want to start there, we can, but I'm not going to today. We're going to start with the Wii. This is truly the first console in which they had a 3D Mario and a 2D Mario side by side. Now, no, they didn't release in the same year, but they were around the same time and on the same successful console to where we can truly compare raw number to raw number. Super Mario Galaxy was the first 3D Mario game to sit alongside a 2D Mario game on a Nintendo console. Mario Galaxy, one of the best games ever made. So many people's favorite Mario game and a beautiful soundtrack with amazing atmosphere. It is a beautiful game overall. That game sold 12 million copies on the Wii. 12 million is a great number, but when you take into account the 100 million people that bought Wiis, you kind of look at it a little sideways. And now we can compare that directly to New Super Mario Bros. Wii. How many games did that sell? 30 million copies. Super Mario Bros. Wii sold 30 million, almost 3 times as many sales as Super Mario Galaxy. And even if we were to combine Super Mario Galaxy with Super Mario Galaxy 2, in my opinion, the best 3D Mario game ever made, that game sold 7 million. So we put 7 million with 12 million, you get 19, and you're still 11 million short. And guess what? 11 million is the exact number that Super Mario 64 DS sold on the DS. So even if you were to combine the 64 DS, Galaxy 1, and Galaxy 2, you would get 30 million, which is the exact amount you would need to catch up to Mario Bros. Wii. So now we have on 2 cases here, one I'm not really counting with the DS and 30 million, and now one we can definitely count with the Wii and 30 million. 2D Mario is absolutely taking the lead here. Well, let's move on to the next console of interest here, the 3DS. The 3DS had Super Mario 3D Land, which was an interesting game in its own right. It's a lot of context that I will eventually come back to here, so just for now, let's compare 3D to 2D. 3D Land, what did it sell? About 13 million copies. What game is it up against in the 2D category? New Super Mario Bros. 2. And this game has a lot of context as well. That game, how many did it sell? just over 13 million copies, more than 3D Land by only a bit, but still undeniably more. Yikes, this is not really looking good, is it? Then we have the Wii, it won. The 3DS, it won again. 2D Mario is a Triple Crown winner already. Okay, well, let's move over to the Wii U. What did we have here? Again, a lot of context, I will come back to this, but New Super Mario Bros. U sold about 5 million copies, and if we're really being nitty-gritty here, really being specific, 5.82 million. Okay, that's important. 5.82 million. Jot that down, remember that. Next, we have Super Mario 3D World. This game sold 5.89 million copies. Now, these numbers are so close, they are almost simply a wash. But if we have to give one to another, it has to be 3D. It has to be about 70,000 more copies of a little buffer here to give us a 3D win. And this is the first time in Nintendo's history that we have a 3D console winner. And it's barely by 70,000 copies in a landscape that sells millions and millions of games. In a Mario sphere that knows nothing but success, 70,000 people is what separates 3D and 2D. In fact, you'd be shocked to learn that it's not until the Nintendo Switch and Super Mario Odyssey selling that big 30 million I talked about earlier, do we finally get a 3D winner convincingly winning over a 2D game. Super Mario Odyssey sold 30 million copies. What's the 2D game we can compare to that? Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and it sold about 17 million copies. Mario Maker 2 was on this console, as was Mario Maker on the Wii U, but I am simply comparing mainline game to mainline game that is new to that console. I'm really trying not to count any sort of remakes, re-releases, or any sort of sequel of a different kind. Mario Maker is a 2D Mario, but it's so different and captivating in its own right that I don't feel comfortable comparing it to the 3D series. So what gives? Now we have learned that 2D Mario beats out 3D Mario in every single case, except for 70,000 people's difference on the Wii U, which is basically a wash, it's basically a draw, and then 3D Mario taking over on the Nintendo Switch. What gives? Is 3D Mario actually not a system seller? Are all these people crazy? What's going on here? This, my friends, is where the main portion of this video, the main point, comes in. Numbers are incredibly important in my opinion. Looking over these sales pieces of data, it's so fascinating, and it does paint a big and broad picture as to what a company is doing right and what a company is doing wrong, how the people are consuming their products, and what types of products they want even more. But what we need to be so careful about is putting all of these numbers into their respective context, with the caveat of also knowing that sales numbers aren't always everything. There is a reason why everything happens outside of simply this game being better than this game, and this game sells more, so that means it is a system seller over this game. For example, and all of my Kirby fans, just close your ears here for a second, I'm not trying to slander you guys, but just listen. Kirby Star Allies sold about 4.38 million copies, a respectable number for a game most people thought was highly unfinished and almost a slap in the face to many fans. It was way too easy and you could finish it in an afternoon. This was one of the poster child games of 2018 in terms of people saying, yeah, these games aren't finished, and they're deciding to go back and update them later on, and it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. It added a lot of discourse in which people said, why is Nintendo continuing to release these games that are not finished, are not ready, and they are adding in more content later as if that retroactively fixes it for the people that bought it day one? There's just a lot wrong with this game, and although it ended up being a solid game, after a lot of those updates ended up coming out to satisfy those fans, there was still a big controversy around this game, and it is not at all considered to be one of the best 2D Kirby games, and it sold 4.38 million. Well, on the Nintendo Switch, Super Mario Galaxy plus Super Mario Galaxy 2, and also those games were released separately, so counting those numbers together, we have Super Mario Galaxy that sold about 2 million copies, and then Galaxy 2 sold about 2 million as well. Those games together sit at about 4 million, which is less than Kirby Star Allies. And if you were to take them individually and say 2 million versus 4, 2 million versus 4, well, who cares? Kirby Star Allies is better. If we're saying that all of these numbers equate to a better game or equate to a game being better for the masses, then Kirby Star Allies is better than Mario Galaxy and Mario Galaxy 2. And that's all I can say about that if I am a numbers person and I only listen to the numbers and no context whatsoever. That is why it is so important that we don't just look at numbers and just say, boom, this is a great thing and this is a bad thing because it sold well or because it didn't sell well. There are reasons to why all these things happen. The Nintendo Switch 2, fastest selling console ever. A lot of great stuff about the hardware. I love the console itself. I've enjoyed so many of the games, but just because it is the fastest selling console of all time does not mean it is immune to criticism or that there is nothing going on with this console or Nintendo at large that is making this totally fine and there's nothing wrong and we just can't criticize them whatsoever. It also doesn't mean that we should be criticizing it without any sort of context or any sort of positivity. There needs to be a little bit of nuance to all of this. I am not at all a Nintendo grifter. I am much more positive than I probably should be in a lot of aspects, and a lot of people have called me a grifter for my last 2 videos going over the sales number of the Switch 2 and then of course comparing it to the Wii. I love my Switch 2. There's nothing wrong with it in my opinion, but there is something wrong with it in terms of other people's opinions, and I can see that kind of forming. I can see that kind of snowballing. That's what those 2 videos were about, but now if we were to look at 3D Mario, come back to the main point of this video, we need to look at this in context and look at all these numbers once more. Starting with the DS, even though I said it didn't quite count, we're not going to count it officially, but still, it is something interesting I think we need to look at for the purposes of this context. Super Mario 64 DS, for example, sold 11 million like we said earlier. What console is it on? It's on a handheld console. What was this console known for? Well, it was known for being a wild success and being the best handheld console of Nintendo's entire existence. But what else is the DS known for? It's known for pulling in a lot of the casual fans. Around this time period was when Iwata was really pushing forward with this blue ocean ideology, catching so many people outside of the normal gaming sphere to where they could bring in grandma and grandpa and your little cousin and all of these people that never cared about games before through accessibility. And through just doing things differently, doing things the Nintendo way, letting the hardcore gamers go to their PlayStation and Xbox and drink their root beer and drink their Mountain Dew, and then you have yourself Nintendo in the corner where everyone can enjoy all of their games. Let me ask you a question. If you are a fan of Nintendo, if you are a fan of gaming, but only a little bit, just barely a fan, you're not going to play video games all the time. In fact, you're most likely not playing any video games on your own time. But if you do decide to splurge, if you do decide to go out there, buy a DS, pick up a game, what game are you more likely to pick up? A game in which you are going to have to work in a 3-dimensional space, having yourself a D-pad in which you're going to have to move in all sorts of directions to have a depth perception just right to be able to jump from platform to platform skillfully and be able to take into account all of the camera controls and everything around you, or simply picking up a game to where you go left, right, and press B to jump. The casual gamer will be appealed to far more from a 2D game than a 3D game. That's just factual. That's just objective. Now, of course, casual gamers are also going to be drawn to those bigger worlds, to those eye-popping visuals, to something that you can run around in. That is also something that people are going to be more drawn to. But when you're talking about grandma and grandpa and you're talking about the kids playing the DS and the Wii, that is what comes to mind. Is me having to sit down with them and tell them how to work in a 3D space? No. I think I'd rather just give them Super Mario Bros. Wii, which is the next example we have here, another 2D game. And oh wait, what was this game's main draw? 4 players playing together, playing with your family. What is something you could not do in Super Mario Galaxy? Play together. You could have 2-player mode if you wanted, but simply pointing the controller at the screen, having a little star bit there that you could just shoot star bits at, it's not fun. It's not really something that I think is going to be engaging for most 2 players. It is something, but it's always been relegated much more to that, 3-year-old kid that wants to play with me, and I really want to play Mario Galaxy by myself, so I'll just give him the remote and he can play with me, I guess. Technically he is, but he's not doing anything. The same thing heavily applies to the Wii example here, with Super Mario Galaxy and Galaxy 2 being critically acclaimed, some of the best games ever made. People loved those games, and yet it couldn't hold a candle in terms of sales numbers to Super Mario Bros. Wii. That 4-player drive was huge for people who had so many Wii remotes lying around their houses. Having all of your kids being able to play together, having grandma and grandpa join in on the fun, everyone knew what it was to hold a Wii controller and be able to shake it around. It was super easy. So of course, in the context of understanding, the Wii and the DS were both owned by not hardcore gamers, but totally casual gamers. This is going to make a lot more sense to have a 2D game sell way better than a 3D game, and especially considering the 2D series was having a renaissance. Super Mario Bros. Was the big game on the NES, sold 40 million copies. We talked about that earlier, how it saved everything. So that is extremely nostalgic to all the parents that were considering buying consoles for their kids. Oh my gosh, Mario is back. I've not seen a 2D game in ages, and that was back when he looked like this. He looked like this little sprite. Back when Mario genuinely looked like this, and this was the most recognizable way to understand what Mario was. That nostalgia worked in droves for people to go to the stores and buy these new 2D games that were back and better than ever. Then you move forward to the 3DS. What is different about the 3DS from the DS to the Wii? In my opinion, there were more hardcore gamers, but still, it was advertised as a DS with 3D graphics. So still, there were casual players going to buy the 3DS and then hardcore gamers going to buy it and having all sorts of different kinds of experience. It hit a really nice balance in my opinion. But what's the context here? You have a 2D game in which it's New Super Mario Bros. 2. So you're already kind of jumping into sequel territory here, in which we know sequels never sell better than the original. I made a whole video about that in like my first year of this channel's existence. It's probably a bad video, but I'll put it here for you to click on just in case you want to see some history. But sequels never tend to sell all that much better than the originals, and of course it's just something that's like, oh, it's this again. So even though it's a good concept, even though people love it, it's not going to be something that really catches the eye, because New Super Mario Bros. On the DS sold like gangbusters, and then they have 2, and it's like, okay, it's that again. Like, we know what we're getting into here, but it's nothing jaw-dropping. So it makes a ton of sense in my opinion that that number would drop from 30 million to 13 million. There were also just less people that owned 3DSs than DSs in the first place. The 3DS was a huge failure at launch, and they had to actually drop the price because no one was willing to pay that much to get into handheld gaming. So then we look at the 3D game on that console. 3D Land. It sold about 500,000 less than the 2D alternative, and why was that? Because 3D Land is commonly known as the most hand-holdy, unoriginal, uninspiring 3D Mario game of all time. People will clown on Mario Sunshine and complain about that game's jank, but that game had a visual identity. That game had so much going for it in terms of it being original, having something really fun to latch onto. 3D Land was essentially 2D Mario in a 3D space. It was as simple as Mario could ever get in a 3D environment. This is the 3D game that grandma and grandpa and all your kids can get in on. This is the 3D game that will appeal to the most people because it is super easy. The first 8 worlds are the type of worlds that anyone can get through. Then the next 8 were for the hardcore gamer that were a lot of fun to go through. But still, 8 worlds of just kind of drab levels with uninspired design and really weak music, in my opinion. Yeah, that's going to appeal to a lot more people, and that makes a lot more sense as to why it was neck and neck with those 2D games, and why it still even sold less than the 2D game that was a sequel of a concept from the NES. Of course the 2D game sold better, and of course the 3D game started to match it once it started to become more accessible to the type of audience that was going to buy it. Then we have the Wii U. Here we have the same exact story, except the context of the console is a little bit different. The Wii U itself was a massive failure. So honestly, the types of people that bought the Wii U were either confused Wii fans that didn't know what they were really getting into and still that casual audience, or hardcore Nintendo gamers. Those hardcore fans were there from day 1 to day 1,000. They were going to stick around forever, but not everybody stuck around. All those hardcore gamers didn't necessarily stay with Nintendo. Some of them did. I was a big Wii U guy, but a lot of people left and ended up coming back later. So if we're talking about the audience for the Wii U here, there were a lot of hardcore Nintendo fans, a lot of people that love Mario, but still probably some casual fans that were interested in buying this console. And remember, this is the difference, 70,000 between Super Mario Bros. U and 3D World. You only have 70,000 copies worth of difference. And again, here we see it's a 2D game that's relatively uninspired from a concept that is so old and outdated at this point. People were so tired of those 2D games coming back to back to back to back, and it still sold the exact same amount hardly as 3D World. 3D World, what was that? It was basically a sequel to 3D Land. Now, of course, this game was much grander. It had so much more inspired creativity. It had so much better level design. The music was top tier. This game was amazing in many ways, but it was still a very simplistic 3D Mario. That sandbox, that open zone in which you could kind of go wherever you wanted and explore, however, and there wasn't a very clear direction at all times, it was gone. At that point, it was basically a 2D game in a 3D style, but really stylized. 3D World hit a great balance, I think, but at the same time, it was really catering towards a more casual audience, more accessible types of people. So in all of 2D versus 3D history here, in which on the same console it had a brand new 2D and 3D game, we can see that accessibility, that games that are more simple are the types of games that have appealed to the types of audiences that were those console fan bases. Now here, we finally get back to the Nintendo Switch. Super Mario Odyssey was the big holiday title for Nintendo in 2017, the big first holiday title for the Nintendo Switch in general. Mario Odyssey sold 30 million copies because of all of the hype surrounding it. What was the context of this game? The context was everyone was losing their minds. Everyone was so excited to see the return of a 3D sandbox style. At some point, the hardcore fans and the actual amount of online presence that people have and are spouting out on Twitter does actually reach the casual audience. The casual people will see the vocal minority that people speak of, and they will start to form their own opinions based on that. Mario Odyssey may not have been a very accessible game in terms of it being an exact replica of a 2D game in a 3D environment, but it certainly was accessible to most people. It was the type of game that hardcore fans could get into and master the controls and do all sorts of crazy tricks, or grandma and grandpa and your kids could get in on the fun and be able to control Cappy as that second player, or even just play as Mario himself and be able to play in assist mode, which was heavily marketed at the time. If you fall off, a bubble will bring you back up. You aren't going to have to worry about damage either. You're pretty much invincible. You can just go through the game at your pace and not have to worry about anything. You can play it and enjoy it. This was the first game in terms of 3D Mario that actually had a real assist mode outside of simply having an invincible item that got you through every single level. But I am saying, like, those kids, the types of people that are really going to get into Mario, or the type of elderly person that's really not all there, they're going to enjoy having these games put in front of them. Nintendo finally struck a balance between having the perfect audience to cater to and having a game that catered to both sides, but really catered to the hardcore fan even more. Having the casual people come in based off of the hype of the hardcores, and then having all of those people love the Nintendo Switch to begin with. Everyone that bought the Switch day one were Nintendo fans, but the concept of the Switch won people over even more. This was the perfect fan base in my opinion. You had people from the hardcore side of things that were buying more Switches and playing more games and getting into it, and leading to better PR for all of the casual fans. Then the casual fans themselves came in because of course they did. It's Nintendo, it was a cheap console, you could get a Switch Lite for $200, Mario Odyssey on sale for like $50, and boom, you're good. It makes perfect sense why 3D Mario ended up selling way more than 2D Mario. But still, when did Super Mario Bros. Wonder come out? It came out in 2023, just 2 years before the console was off the market in terms of it being the #1 console. The Switch 2 was only 2 years away at that point, and Mario Odyssey had been on the scene for 6 years. And honestly, even though Odyssey does make a lot of sense as to why it was the first one to dominate the new 2D game, if we really look at it and if you really say, okay, the 2D games versus the 3D games, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. New Super Mario Bros. U on the Wii U came over to the Switch and had a deluxe version. That game sold 18 million copies, sneakily making it one of the best-selling Switch games. Then of course Mario Bros. Wonder went on to sell about 17 million, so if you combine those two, oh no, the 2D games did outsell the one 3D game. Now sure, we could bring Bowser's Fury and 3D World into this, which that sold over 10 million as well and was a great game, loved that so much, but still, if you were to look at it and say 2D games technically did have a big success, it was just an old game. What if instead of releasing a U Deluxe in the second year of that console, the third year of that console, they had released Mario Wonder in 2019? Right before COVID, right before everything happened in which everyone went out to buy Switches and Animal Crossing. What if that had happened? Well, maybe these numbers would be a lot more close. The context here is not looking good for Nintendo and 3D Mario and 2D Mario. At that point, you're just kind of getting into the nitty-gritty, which is pretty much the entirety of this video, isn't it? But still, I do think it's very interesting to look at these numbers and compare. 2D definitely didn't sell better than 3D in this generation, and I think that's because of these big reasons I mentioned earlier, but just the accessibility. Overall, Mario Odyssey was an accessible game. Even though it was a very big sandbox style, similar to 64, the environments weren't all that massive. The biggest environment in the game, I'm pretty sure, was like Tostarena or the Wooded Kingdom, perhaps, but both of those were pretty accessible in terms of knowing exactly where you needed to go next. You could explore to your heart's content, you could go down to the deep woods and find that dinosaur down there, but still, a lot of that was just going from point to point. They would very clearly direct you to where you needed to go. And just to be clear here, I'm not saying that 3D environments are the type of gameplay styles that are not going to work well with casual fans. Look no further than Breath of the Stinkin' Wild, who sold a little bit better than Odyssey, 32 million copies, and that game was played by casuals all the time. But what is that game most famous for? It's famous for being incredibly hard at the beginning of the game, for everyone having died to every single Guardian and Lionel they encountered and every Bokoblin, killing them on the Great Plateau. Hardly no one could make it off the Great Plateau. And to be honest with you, if you've seen my content and you've really watched my videos, you'll know I had to return Breath of the Wild in 2017 because I was like 12 years old and I was bad at the game. I was so bad I couldn't get off the Great Plateau. So just because those casual fans did in fact end up beating that game and loving it and spending hundreds of hours into it, let's not discount the fact that it was incredibly hard for most of them. Sure, some could just learn it and get into gaming as a whole, but some of them don't have time for that. Most people ended up probably just playing the game, learning about it, and doing whatever they wanted in this big world because you could do whatever you wanted and have a good time with the beauty of it and not really the combat of it. Shoot, I still know people that haven't beaten Ganon to this day. They just go around, they play, they beat up on bokoblins, they explore the world, they find new Korok seeds, and that's their fun. That's what they do. But bringing it back to Mario here to kind of conclude this video, 3D Mario is a big game, okay? It is the type of game that can sell a system. We see that from Mario Odyssey. But historically, honestly, it hasn't been. Like, if we were to really look at it, even in the context, it makes sense as to why those games didn't sell consoles. But honestly, if we're looking at it, we need to recognize that these games don't inherently lead to a console's success. 3D Mario and Zelda was a great first year for the Switch. It kind of set the tone for what types of games we could expect, and it set the tone for the audience and like, oh wow, the Switch will produce this type of game. I think that's very important for a console's first year. Having all of those games, having all of those fans come in and be able to expect this type of game. Then moving forward, you can go off and play whatever games you want and buy whatever you want, and after the audience gets big enough, you can appeal to more types of people, but having those broad, appealing, sweeping games that set the tone, it's so important. Mario Odyssey set that tone, and even though it wasn't until 6 years later that we got that new 2D Mario, from all of the burnout, the developers themselves told us that they didn't even have a deadline. They had no sort of deadline whatsoever. They were able to develop this game until their hearts were content, until they were ready to ship it out and say, you know what, this is a good game. But there is still a chance. If Wonder had come out when U Deluxe did and was a brand new game that was getting people excited right before COVID and then during COVID, there's a chance that those numbers would have inflated as well, and 2D would be surpassing or at least being neck and neck once again with 3D Mario. We're seeing a trend here of needing to be accessible, but also being able to give those hardcore gamers something to actually interact with. Having those controls be as deep as you make them is very important. So, let's answer the question, is 3D Mario a system seller? Historically, no. The answer is no. On consoles where there were 2D games and 3D games, it's just not been the case. Now, if you look at the N64, Mario 64 was absolutely a system seller. Sunshine was absolutely a system seller for GameCube. But what I think that really tells us is that Mario is a system seller, not necessarily the 3D or 2D counterpart. Whatever mainline Mario is on a console, that's the game that's going to sell the console. Look at Mario Kart World, for example. I know this is not a platforming game, but it still is Mario. Mario Kart World has almost a 1-to-1 attach rate with the Switch 2. 14 million copies sold on a console with 17 million consoles shipped. The next closest is Donkey Kong Bonanza at 4 million with 10 million less. Mario is so important to Nintendo. So then why is it, if it's not necessarily a system seller to be a 3D Mario game, that people clamor for it, that people say that they need to have a 3D Mario game, that the Switch 2 needs to have one, and that it won't sell well and won't be a success if it doesn't? That's because what types of people are spouting that? The types of people on social media. What types of people are looking forward to a new 3D Mario game? The hardcore Nintendo fans, the Nintendo YouTubers that find it a little bit more stimulating, a little bit more engaging than the 2D games. Because we're used to games. We've played hundreds of them. We want something a little bit more, something more fun. And 3D games, 3D platformers, especially in the Mario sphere, are so much fun and they are so engaging. And so it's really us who have been pushing this narrative that honestly isn't true. Mario sells consoles. 3D Mario? Not necessarily. 2D Mario? Sure, historically, but that's just being Mario. If you're Mario, you sell. Now, of course, this is only 2D versus 3D. If we were to look at all of the 3D games and say, oh, let's look at the 3D Mario versus a Xenoblade game or a Splatoon game or something a little bit lesser than a Mario, like even Zelda, if you were to compare it to Zelda, Mario outsells it by so much on every single console. All these other franchises don't really hold a candle to even 3D Mario. If you were really to rank the franchises that sell the most for Nintendo, Pokemon would be number one, unfortunately, but that's if we're counting like not Game Freak stuff, we're counting internal publishing studios for Nintendo here, we're counting Mario at number 1 and Mario at number 2 and Mario at number 3, because all these different types of Mario games sell better than every other type of franchise. So while 3D Mario games might not inherently be system sellers, the context in which they are sold can absolutely lead to more people buying consoles, and of course the fans themselves are looking forward to it. I loved Mario Odyssey. I can't wait for whatever's next. I love Bowser's Fury. I love 3D World, Mario Galaxy 2 and 1, all these games that have been put on the Switch with now 64 and Sunshine with that package from 3D All-Stars. I loved all those games, and I can't wait for the next one. So that means we are going to have to hold out even longer. And honestly, we need to stop saying that 3D Mario is the type of game that is going to sell all of these systems until we at least get a little bit more data. We're going to find out more soon about what the Switch 2 is actually going to sell and how many types of people are actually buying this game and buying this console. So that was the context of 3D Mario versus 2D Mario. System sellers are such a weird enigma. Types of games that will sell a console are going to be different based on the type of fan base that is on that console. The Wii and Wii Sports, it set the tone, right? Wii Sports set the tone for the types of people that were going to buy. The DS tried to set that tone with 64 DS and show, hey, look, this is what our DS can do, but they honestly pivoted back to it being a little bit of a weaker piece of hardware and just going back to 2D and Nintendogs and the casual fans. All of this matters. Context matters. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure you leave a comment down below telling me all of your thoughts on this video, this topic, and all of this in general. The comments are actually very important. I read most of them and reply to most of them as well. And if you do, maybe you'll end up inspiring a video just like this one, because if not for that comment, this never would have been made. Make sure you smash that like button, subscribe button. Make sure you join the community by clicking that notification bell to know exactly when the videos release. And also consider joining my membership program, a few bucks a month, to get early access to videos sometimes and a lot of great perks. It really does help the channel out and help me as a personal content creator. I reference these two videos throughout, but if you want to see my opinion on why the Switch 2 could be the next Wii, click on the left side of your screen to see what I mean by that, and to see all of these sales numbers and what they mean for the Switch 2 moving forward, click on the right side of your screen. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. Make sure you have yourself a phenomenal day. This has been Ray's Nintendo Talk. I have been Ray, and I will see you all in the next video.